Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Angie. I'm the Executive Director of New Ventures BC, and we are an early stage accelerator and competition that supports and recognizes early stage tech startups here in BC. So we have, for some of you who have heard of the New Ventures BC competition, it's just wrapped for 2021. And congratulations to Traffic Driven Technologies, who was our winner this year. And part of the competition, and you can find all of this year's webinars on our YouTube channel, is we do a pretty extensive kind of crash course for startups, a webinar series or education series for companies. And one of the topics we always like to cover is, of course, financing. And we did cover financing in a few different ways, but we didn't actually get a chance to really do a deep dive on non-dilutive funding, which is kind of like a very key step in the fundraising journey of tech startups. So super happy to be able to present it now with our partners from Boast.ai. So yeah, it's going to be about an hour, I believe. We'll have some time for Q&A. All of the information that is being shared today will be available for you to access. So we'll send a link out for you to access information afterwards. So so don't feel like you have to take notes or endless screenshots. Everyone at Boast has already prepare the information for you. So with me today, of course, is Anastasia Hambali, and she is with Boast.ai, and she is the person to talk to if you need anything around what non-dilutive options are, and also how to leverage bridge financing to kind of keep you moving. So I'm going to pass it over to Anastasia, and I will be monitoring the chat and helping with Q&A along the way, but over to you.
For sure. Thank you so much, Angie. And you're absolutely right. Like anything non-dilutive, that's my jam. I think a little bit of a background first. I've been on both sides of the table, from early stage investment as a startup operator, and then as a startup operator, and I'm back to the accelerator side, and now with Boast.ai as an operator again. So I've worked with 75 plus different companies, like from basically pre-seed all the way to Series B. And non-dilutive is something that I feel like most founders neglect to really think about until they got to later stage. And that's why kind of like this is something that's very near and dear to my heart, and I hope that you get something out of it. I will preface this by saying that it can be quite dry, because I'm literally just like trying to spout as much information as I can to you from what I've gathered over the last few years. Having said that, if you have any questions, feel free to stop me at any time. Just kind of like ask the questions, or after this call, even when you're kind of like watching the recording, you have, hey, a question around a particular program or want to get connected with someone from that particular funding program, let me know and I'll do my best to connect you with someone on the team. Does that sound good to everyone? Thumbs up, thumbs down? Yep. Okay, so a quick kind of like introduction, like I am Director Partial of Boast.ai. Prior to joining Boast, as I mentioned, I've been a part of a small investment group and a startup operator and founding team of an agricultural technology company that exited to TELUS Agriculture. I've been an advisor to founders that are scaling their companies from 1 to 10 million ARR as well. Today, we will cover the different types of non-dilutive funding, preemptive versus retroactive grants, loans, when you should be accessing them, and then the SR&ED program specifically. Hold on, let's see. A little bit about Boast before we begin. So Boast.ai has been helping technology companies here in BC, Canada, and the US since 2011. So we started out as a professional service company, basically doing your SR&ED manually. But what's different now is we actually have a fintech platform that connects with the company system of records. That way, essentially, instead of doing the manual work that you would typically do with SR&ED, and we can cover a little bit more about that later, we automate the process so that you don't spend more than 10-20 hours the entire year to get your SR&ED money back. So that's a little bit more about Boast. Now we're getting to the meat of it, the different types of non-dilutive funding and why it is really important. So non-dilutive funding, first and foremost, is any kind of funding that doesn't require you to give up any equity in your business. Founders can maintain complete ownership of your company if you're not raising any outside money, which means that you can operate with a little bit more autonomy. Even if you're raising money, you can still retain a larger portion of your ownership as well. There's no question that equity funding, anything that you raise from your angel investors and VC, plays a crucial role in your business growth. But it is not the only source of capital because it is extremely expensive. And if you're not careful, you may lose too much equity in the process. You have no idea how many times I've actually sat down with a founder, gone through their cap table and modeled out what their Series A would look like, given what they've done with the multiple rounds of saves and how much equity they have given out at the seed round or at the bridge round. By the time they get to Series A, the founders may not have controlling interest of the company anymore, or they become minority owner. So let's try to avoid that, shall we? Okay, so the first kind of like type that we need to look into is loans. Essentially, this is your venture debt, kind of like your revenue-based financing and your SR&ED financing. This is a little bit kind of more difficult to get if you're in the earlier stage, if you don't have any revenue, but it is something that you can tap into later down the road. There is also grants and tax credits. So the difference between grants and SR&ED or any kind of like tax credits, grant is generally upfront money, meaning that you get the money before you start on a project. This makes the money a lot more predictable, it's guaranteed, and you don't really have to worry about your cash flow. But SR&ED and any other tax credit program, in the US, we call it the R&D tax credit program, it is a spend it before you get it, which means you still need to upfront the cost, whether that's salary, whether that's equipment costs, or any kind of like operational costs. You need to spend it before you can claim that, hey, you know what, I need X% back because this is what I did with the money. And in terms of kind of like sources of different non-dilutive funding, we have quite a bit. We're not going to dive too much in depth into each program, but I do want to give you just a quick overview. So Futurpreneur is kind of like a loan, it's early stage, and it's any business, and it's also Futurpreneur also works with BDC, so you can get follow on. IRAP is mid-stage, CMF and Telefilm is more on the digital media side, same thing with IDMTC. SR&ED is also a tax credit. MyTax is education hiring subsidy, which means you can hire people from the funding that they have given. And then BCIP is for non-commercialized products, so meaning that you cannot have kind of like later stage revenue or like big clients just yet. And then there's also SDTC and bridge funding. We'll dive into kind of like them a little bit more. But first and foremost, I want to let you know when you can actually find the grants for your company. You want to Google Innovate Canada Grant Portal app first and foremost. The screenshot I actually grabbed from their website. Essentially what happens is this is a federal portal that will aggregate all of the funding options available to your company depending on where you are in your life cycle. It also contains all of the provincial government specific funding. Whoop, my bad. There we go. Other than that, I do kind of recommend you to, depending on your space, you want to go into your federal government sites, your ministry, and then mailing lists, in industry association, or connect with any chamber of commerce. They usually have similar lists as well. Sorry, my Zoom seems to be rolling faster than I can. So next one is preemptive and retroactive funding. And what does that mean? So preemptive meaning that it actually requires application. So a lot of grants is actually preemptive in that way. It requires proactive activities from your end and any kind of like reporting to be filed at the end of the day. And retroactive meaning that you need to document the entire process and a kind of like proof of work. And it requires kind of like some sort of scientific intelligence filing in order for you to access the funding. So we just keep that in mind as you're thinking about the different types of funding that you're going to access, because depending on which type of funding, you either have to do the work upfront or later after you get the money. Now we're going to dive deeper into the different funding programs themselves. The first and foremost is kind of like Futurpreneur. This is for the startup stage. But generally speaking, it's beyond ideation, meaning that you've done a little bit more of customer validation. You know exactly what you want to build and how you want to build it out. It is a loan with a personal guarantee. So keep that in mind that you need to do a personal guarantee for Futurpreneur. Generally speaking, first-time entrepreneur gets about $45,000. And they also work with BDC, meaning if you get approved for Futurpreneur and you're showing good traction with them, you're likely eligible for a higher amount from BDC later down the road. There is a $50 application fee, and they do require a business plan. I cannot remember right now if they still require a full-on traditional business plan that you would write in a Word document, or if they would actually do the startup canvas. So this is something that you will need to check with your Futurpreneur account manager when you're applying and see kind of like what would be best for them. All right, and then one more thing about kind of Futurpreneur as well is that you will need to start paying back after the first year. So the first year, you're only paying the interest, but you kind of like start to pay the principal after that. I see a couple of questions in the chat, Angie. Do we want to address them now or?
Someone's just asking for the link to the grant portal app, and I was just about to find it, but Dave's already done it, so we're good.
Perfect. Thanks, Dave. Yeah, the next one is IRAP. You have heard a lot of it, and then thinking about kind of like what it is. So first and foremost, just think about it as innovation funding for early stage technology companies. It is project-based, so it depends on kind of what it is that you're trying to build. And the first grant is usually about $50K. Can I get a show of hands, if you guys don't mind, who has done IRAP, who's thinking about doing it? Kind of, where are you guys in the process? Anyone?
You can use the hand raise on Zoom too.
Okay, perfect. So you are familiar with it already, but if anyone wants an introduction and kind of like, or explore for any additional funding, let me know. Happy to connect you with their team as well. Again, the requirement is fairly easy. You just need to fill out their application. You have to have some sort of prototype, but you don't have to have sales in order to be eligible for IRAP. Next one. This is CMF experimental fund. So there are 3 funding stages, basically pre-production, production, and kind of like the development of the product or the distribution of the product itself. They do contribution of up to 75% of the cost, which means that you still need to come up with the 15%. The best part about non-dilutive funding, especially from government, is that oftentimes you can actually stack them up. So make sure that when you're talking to IRAP or CMF or anyone else, ask them if you can actually stack the funding. What that means is kind of like you can claim, say that it's whatever the cost is up to 100%, but like 70% go to CMF and then 25% go to a different funding bucket, essentially. You do need to have a business plan, again, kind of like for CMF, and you need to have a better kind of a distribution channel in order to qualify for this specifically. There we go. This one, IDMTC, who's familiar with this? Maybe show of hands. Okay, so this is what we're kind of getting into the tax credit side of things as well. It is a refundable provincial tax credit. If we remember from about 5 minutes ago, that means you actually have to spend the money first. It filed at the end of the year with the federal SR&ED claim. You need to actually apply for the provincial government 3 months before your year end. So be very mindful of that deadline. And essentially what you can get is incentivizing kind of 17.5% of any interactive digital media program. I am not going to get into details because it's not applicable to all of you, but if you do want to talk a little bit more about that, just shoot me an email after this and we can book some time to go through this in a bit more detail, okay? Next one is MyTax. This is kind of like part of that hiring kind of like process. So essentially MyTax provide postgraduate students and professors to work on a specific company project. So you need to come to MyTax with a specific project in mind. You can use them for, you know, I want to go to market in this particular region, or I need to do market research or my competitors on X, or I need to understand what the distribution channel would be like for my specific vertical. So these are examples of projects that you can go to MyTex for to get help for. It applies to any industries in any sector, and it covers 50% of the project cost of the graduate student stipends. Again, MyTex you can actually stack. So if you have different funding from a different program, you can actually do 50% MyTex, 50% other funding. So essentially the cost becomes free. The beauty of MyTex is if any of you are in AI or machine learning, they actually have students and graduate students who are working on or learning about kind of like machine learning or working on certain projects with universities that they will actually loan out or kind of like place at different companies to help with their projects as well. This is probably one of the lesser known one, the Building Canada Innovation Program. It is a federal program in which federal government essentially says that we will be the first customer for your product. This is usually for innovative product, things that require a lot of R&D, and you need kind of that credibility to actually, before you go after enterprise clients. The contracts are generally about $250,000 to $1 million, depending on the government agency themselves. You do need a formal business plan. So we're talking about like a full-on Word document kind of like of your entire market, you go to market and what the problem that you're trying to solve. So this is slightly different from Futurpreneurs. Sometimes they might actually take less robust of kind of like a business plan, but Building Canada program, you need to make sure that your business plan is solid. You need to have a prototype as well when you're applying for this program, and 0 sales prior to the submission of your application. This is crucial. Make sure that there is no sales revenue coming in from it. Next one is on the Sustainable Economic Development in Canada. It is another non-dilutive, which will fund up to 1/3 of your company's pre-commercial development and demonstration project. And 2/3 of the cost would be kind of, again, other funding buckets. And the minimum investment is usually around $250K. You do need patents, or kind of like if you're applying for patents or any sort of intellectual property in order to qualify for this program specifically. Sorry, I'm just kind of like monitoring the chat there. And next one is kind of on the bridge financing. This is important when you're going kind of like from angel to your pre-seed or your seed round. These are essentially loan. It can be done by banks or private institutions. It will require something to loan against in the event of a default. So you need to kind of like guarantee it with something else. The amount of loan in terms of repayment vary depending on who it is that you work with. So the different requirements, obviously, is an asset that you can actually use as a guarantee. You can use SR&ED or your future revenues or any kind of like contract or MOUs as to kind of like to guarantee the loan as well. So essentially, bridge financing kind of like work for companies that have some sort of revenue coming in already, but you need to keep that in mind. Keep in mind that bridge financing or any loans are generally higher in interest rates. Depending on who you work with and where your company is at and your risk level to the banks, you're looking at anywhere between 12 to 20%. Again, kind of don't quote me on that because it's basically depending on who you work with, obviously, but that's kind of like the kind of rates that you can expect from any kind of like bridge financing program. So if we kind of like go back to the earlier slides and we talk about revenue-based financing, SR&ED financing, or just kind of like general business loans, these are kind of like the types and the type of kind of like rates that you would be looking at. Is it worth it to do bridge financing? I would still say so, yes. Kind of like at the end of the day, you don't want to give up kind of too much equity, especially if you're in the middle of discussing term sheets or in the middle of due diligence and you need that extra bit of runway. I do recommend talking to kind of like bridge financing or having that line up prior to your fundraising or during the fundraising process. So you are not in a time crunch. You're not like scrambling, trying to find, I need like 2 months of runway as this is closing. So you want to make sure that this is done prior to your kind of like equity round. Is there any questions on that? Are we good? Okay, amazing. Next, but not last but not least, you all have heard of superclusters and probably wondering what it is and kind of like how does it work? How do I get access to it? So supercluster is innovation co-funding. It's usually one-on-one matching, but again, it depends on the type of superclusters that you're working with. So I list out at the bottom there. I'm sorry, I'm not quite sure why this is glitching. List out at the bottom there the different types of the supercluster initiative. So the one that we have here in BC is called digital technology. And another one that a lot of startups work with is the AI one out of Montreal. But it doesn't mean that you only have to work with the one within your province. So if you are in sustainability, you can work with Oceanic Supercluster for sure. If you're in agriculture or agriculture technology, you can work with Protein Supercluster. So these are essentially federal mandate, so you can access different type of funding. I have had companies or founders accessing 2 different types for 2 different projects or different parts of their company. So for example, I'm not gonna name names, but one company in particular accessed the digital supercluster for one project, and then for another one, they accessed the Scale AI Supercluster of Montreal for a different part of their product development. So that's absolutely feasible. Just make sure that you are very clear on the distinction between one versus the other. The only thing I will mention about supercluster is that it will require collaboration between you and an academic or a different industry player. Make sure that when you talk to a supercluster or entering a supercluster project or getting any funding from them, you are crystal clear on who's going to own the IP. Because this collaboration, if you don't have tight IP assignments, issues might arise in the future. In terms of when to access, I'm not going to go into details, but essentially we're looking at prototype or ideation, and in production, meaning kind of like early traction, and commercialization when you actually want to scale. This is a good indicator of when you want to access it and when you want to start preparing for it. For any kind of funding, whether that's equity round or non-dilutive, I would recommend always preparing your documents, anything, get your ducks in a row 2 to 3 months before you absolutely need the money or before the deadline, because it always takes longer than when you think it's going to take. I'm going to list out 3 different hiring and training grants here as well, again, because you want to basically get as much free money as possible. Digital Skills for Youth is a big one. This is a federally mandated program. It is essentially a subsidy up to $30,000 to cover any wages and associated training costs. So when you have people that are essentially early in their career to kind of like mid in their career, 15 to 30 years old, you can actually claim their salaries with this. You can claim for multiple different positions as well. So essentially reducing your payroll costs. But you must provide the intern, we call them intern, even though they're employees, with digital and soft skill experiences that will prepare them for workplace down the road. Your company can totally be the workplace. It's just that, again, I'm using the government language and the funders language that one, it's intern versus employees or full-time employees, and later they can convert into a full-time employee that you can hire, but you don't absolutely have to. This is a federal program that the federal government doesn't want to manage, so they have local delivery agents. So if you go to their website, it will actually take you to a list of different delivery agents across Canada. I believe in BC, we have Innovate BC, BC Tech, and Viatech, but you might want to double check as well. And there you go. Angie also just kind of launched the ISI initiative, the ISI program. That's highly, highly recommended. Please take advantage of that. The next one is Career Launcher. It's another one. I believe this is also federal. It is like 6 months for a digital tech job, and it is $28,000. Digital Skills for Youth and Career Launcher, you cannot stack them up together. Just keep that in mind. but you can stack either of them with Venture for Canada. The subsidy is a lot lower at $7,000, but they do have the interns already selected. So if you don't have the time or the bandwidth to do your own recruitment, but needs kind of certain skill set, this is the organization I recommend you to work with, because they have a pool of students and interns or recent graduates that they have prepared for the startup life. That's one of the best part about this organization. They work with the interns or the talent directly, because working for a startup is very different from working for an established company or even a more mature startup. That's why usually their interns is a lot more adapted to the fast-paced environment that you all run in. And they're a bit more kind of like proactive in that way. So these are people who actually want to work in startups. And of course, SR&ED program. Before I go into details on this one, and I'm changing my screen layout here a little bit, can I see a show of hands on how many people have claimed SR&ED or are claiming right now? Just to see, just to make sure I'm not going to details, too much details if you guys are already doing it. Okay, awesome. All right, we're just gonna run through it pretty quickly then. So first things first, kind of like what is SR&ED? It is really a government program to encourage further innovation in Canada. Personally, I love this program, but I also feel like sometimes Canadian founders tend to spend more on R&D because of this program versus marketing and sales. So please keep that in mind as you're accessing your SR&ED. Please reinvest that money from the government on commercialization, because you're competing against American companies who do not have as much, and they would double down on the sales versus the R&D. Why does that matter? Because at the end of the day, if you don't have customers, it doesn't matter if your product is the best. You need to get the product to the hands of the customers. So this is a scientific research and experimental development program. And what it is you essentially, as a Canadian company, you get 64% cash back on any R&D spend. In 2018 alone, about 3.5 billion was given out, and the number is only going to increase from there. So in terms of kind of like the different criteria that SR&ED does, and this is kind of like where it gets confusing, because first and foremost, you need to have technological uncertainty. You need to have systematic investigation and technological advancement. It doesn't mean that non-technology companies cannot access SR&ED, because yes, they can actually do that, like non-tech startup can do that, as long as they can provide sufficient evidence that they are addressing technological uncertainty, and it is a systematic approach, and there is technological iteration to come out of it. So CRA thinks of the SR&ED project, so whether that's your product development or anything else, as work performed for the purpose of creating new or improving existing materials, devices, products, or processes. So that's kind of like the overarching kind of like lens in which they would examine your SR&ED submissions. Unfortunately, social sciences will not qualify, meaning anything that you do around customer validation or even UI UX, those costs cannot be claimed under SR&ED. Not yet anyway. It might change, but as of now, not really. So how much do you get back? As a Canadian company, or what we would call CCPC, you would get about 64% back on the salary. So these are your software developer, your backend engineer, your CTOs, maybe like at some point or where you're at, your salary as well as a founder or the business founder or non-technical founder would qualify for this. If you use subcontractors, about 32% of their costs would qualify for SR&ED, and any materials that you purchase. The materials here is very important to know that your laptops unfortunately do not qualify. So this needs to be very specific to the project that you're trying to solve. And the other thing that I get questions a lot on the subcontractors, the salaries and the subcontractors, they need to be Canadian based in order for you to be able to claim SR&ED. So you cannot outsource this to an agency somewhere in South Asia or Southeast Asia and then saying that, hey, you know what, this is a contractor, we want to claim 30% of it. It doesn't work that way. They have to be physically in Canada and incorporated in Canada as well. And assuming that all expenses have been paid, you would essentially qualify for a refundable investment tax credits, or ITCS. This means that you get a check back from the government for the amount that we estimated. You file this at the end of your fiscal year. And then if there is no audit, usually you'll get the money back within 2 to 4 months, depending on where you're submitting it on their deadline. So what happens if you are not a Canadian-based company or you're a subsidiary of a different company? This is essentially, it becomes kind of like credit. It's not a refund, a cash refund. And the percentages are also a lot lower than a Canadian-based company. So foreign-owned corporate, this applies to foreign-owned corporation, publicly traded, or Canadian-controlled companies that are earning more than $500,000 in revenue per year. So the tax credit that you get back from this can be carried back 3 years back or forward indefinitely. And same thing, salaries and subcontractors, they also need to be Canadian-based. So the quick do's and don'ts of SR&ED. First and foremost, pay yourself and pay your staff. If you don't pay yourself or your staff, we cannot claim that as part of SR&ED. Start tracking your time and keep your backup documentation on basically on the different projects and then how much time you spend on it. And first and foremost, incorporate your company. If you don't have incorporation, you cannot claim SR&ED. Do not underestimate the importance of the documentation. There are so many times I've heard the stories that kind of like founders trying to file for SR&ED, but they don't have proper documentation, so they get audited, and the scrutiny of the audit is quite a bit intrusive to get kind of like the money from the government. Focus on the business opportunity, and please do not leave SR&ED until last minute. It takes a long time. As a startup operator myself, back in the day, I have done SR&ED manually. It took me as the growth lead, the CTO, the backend engineer, and the co-founders collectively about 100 to 110 hours to prepare for SR&ED. And this is a bit of a plug, but that was kind of like before we started working with Boast, and didn't realize that a lot of things could be automated. So we don't spend more than 10 hours the entire year to actually get that done. So again, if you choose to do it yourself and do it manually, you absolutely can. There are a lot of guides out there on how you can do that, but understand that there's an opportunity cost there, because you're essentially allocating time that you could be doing closing deals and then closing customers to do SR&ED. Again, as I mentioned before, this is what makes us different. Kind of like we essentially connect to your company system of records, your Slack, your accounting, your payroll, your Asana, your Trello, even your email, so that we can pull the data automatically. This way, your technical report for SR&ED that is required, as well as your estimate, it's done automatically and then checked by our team. Our team has decades of experience in SR&ED and in kind of like tax credits, and they're also software engineers by training as well. So rest assured that whatever is done, kind of whatever is presented to you, is not just automated by machine, but it's also checked by professionals. And that's just kind of a bit of a quote from one of our clients here, Jason from Clue, which I think you guys know. That's it from my end. Any questions so far about any of the funding options?
All right, so if you want to ask a question, you are welcome to put your hand up and you can unmute yourself to ask yourself, or if you want to type it in the chat, I can certainly read it for you. Just to get going here, Maxine's talking about a loan she's about to secure through BDC. I'm not sure if you're looking for comparable, or maybe you can elaborate on what you're asking on that one, Maxine. And then maybe you can just talk a bit about, she's also asking about anyone having experience hiring a student and how it went, and if there's any general best practices you can recommend. around that. Did you get that, Anastasia? Sorry.
Sorry, no, it kind of connection kind of broke out a little bit. Sorry, repeat.
Just some general talk about what's it like to hire students. Is it successful? You know, best practices, what to watch out for, kind of a thing.
For sure. Andrew, I think, answered that for all of us. Kind of like you can hire from MyTax and PBC, or even kind of like Venture for Canada or Digital Skills for Youth. They will all have varying different levels. Again, this is something that you need to weed out when you're actually interviewing them, and then kind of like asking what it is that your startup actually really need to have and what are the skills that they can develop as they grow with you. So that's kind of like first and foremost. The one tip that I always recommend founders do when you're hiring a student is understanding how that student learn and understanding who is available from your company to mentor or provide guidance. As a rule of thumb, when I was hiring students or working with founders who are hiring students, I asked like how do they learn? Are they learners by doers? Are they learners by watchers? Or do they need to kind of like be shown like step by step how to do something before they can actually do it themselves? And ask yourself, what kind of resources do you have internally before you can actually do that? So if you're hiring someone who's a doer and just kind of like going to try on different things until they got it right, understand that you need to give that person a long leash to figure out, hey, you know what, this is the end goal, figure it out, try a bunch of things, but the first 1 or 2 tries might not work out, and that's fine, but you need to budget for that time. If you're hiring someone who needs hand holding or kind of like a bit more, hey, these are kind of like how you do things step by step, that's fine too, but you need to make sure that someone on your team can actually put in the resources to do that as well. I think that would be the biggest one.
Okay, great. I've got a question while everyone else, if there's any others. I know it used to be the case with IRAP. In addition to the funding a company, there were also opportunities to hire or get funding for market assessments or other types of help for your company. Is that still the case?
It might be under a different jurisdiction now, because since COVID, Global Affairs Canada is not able to help companies to travel physically to close deals. So a lot of their funding, including like the current one that will expire March 31st, is now allocated to digital go-to-market essentially. So instead of like physically going somewhere to a conference and getting that cost covered by Global Affairs, you can now access the same funds, but use that as your digital marketing if you're targeting, say, Australia or the US or the UK. So keep that in mind. Just go to their website and apply. I think that would be a more straightforward process than trying to figure out if your RF claim.
Okay, got it. Okay, this is a question from Chris here in the chat. Does your review cover programs offered by Community Futures? Or should we check with our local branch separately?
For Community Futures, I would recommend checking with their local branch specifically, because they might have different offering for different branch.
All right. Okay, last call for questions. All right, Anastasia, anything else you want to add on?
Yes, if you are claiming SR&ED and you need kind of like that extra bit of cash, let us know, drop me a line. We'd be happy to do a little bit more or to walk you through what SR&ED financing looks like and what you can expect. I think I have my colleague John here. He was here earlier, not sure. He might have dropped off, but yeah, essentially we do offer kind of like SR&ED financing as well. Generally speaking, it is only available to our clients, but having said that, we started opening it up to a lot of our partners, and NVBC being one of our partners and organization that we support. Anyone that comes from Angie, we will prioritize on our list, because we can't really take on kind of like a lot of clients who are on PDC, but we'll make sure that kind of like we support you throughout your journey.
Okay, great. Yeah, I appreciate that. So yeah, if you are interested in connecting, feel free to send New Ventures an email, and we're happy to connect you.
Yeah,
all right.
I'll drop my email there as well. Oh, perfect. Sorry, wrong one. Typo there. Yep. But yeah, Our SR&ED loan doesn't have any personal guarantee, and I think that's the biggest one for a lot of companies. So no personal guarantee, and further to that, you don't have to have successful SR&ED claims before. If this is your first time, we can still help you with it.
All right, great. And yeah, government money is great because it's free, but it's not work free. So it's definitely good to get all your ducks in a row and get whatever, get it all lined up. Makes a big difference. Okay, well, everyone, thanks for joining us. This video will be made available on our YouTube channel. We'll send out the link after this. And we'll also have a link to the resources that were provided in this presentation from Anastasia and Boast. So that's it. Thanks again, Anastasia, for your time. Thanks to all of you for your time. And everyone enjoy the beautiful rainy weather and hope you have a nice day.
Angie.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Bye.